Okay, we're back with the predictions. This time we're talking about the back end of November and the start of December. Warning, this video might be a little bit long. So, to start things, let's reflect on my predictions from last time and see how we did. Just to get this out of the way, okay, there was no Halloween event, so any predictions I made in that direction were completely wrong. I did say that whatever I did predict would be a stab in the dark, but I had absolutely no idea that they were just going to completely skip Halloween. Probably something to do with the fact that they have been turning away from costumes for multiple reasons. I could speculate, but I won't. So let's just ignore that part. Let's say, how did the JoJo predictions go? I would say, looking at that, I was pretty damn close. I was wrong on part 4 Jotaro. Okay, fair enough. You know, I had a few little bits where it was like the type of event I got it wrong. Okay, yeah, that happens. And a couple of the counters I got wrong as well. And the way they did Koichi was a little bit different than I hoped they would do it. But he was still a limited time event, and all in all, solid. well done, lads. Well done. I think, considering how close I was, moving on to the predictions this month, I should have some confidence. I don't. But let's go for it anyway. This is going to be quite a difficult one. You know, JoJo is ending on the 12th of November, so that's a big gap to fill. We have a big gap to fill, I assume, between the 12th and the 12th. Logically, that would make sense to me. So, we kind of have two options here. One of the options is we're going to have two larger size events, and they're just going to kind of end at different times than they normally would because Christmas is coming up. So, maybe one of the events ends just short of the end of the month, and then the next one ends on the 12th of the following month. Or they're going to try and squeeze 3 events in here. 1 feature festival and 2 smaller events, ensemble events, just like they did in October. At the moment, I'm currently leaning towards the second option. I think there was definitely some backlash on Twitter about the way things were handled last month. You know, people were not happy that there was hardly any farmable characters compared to normal events, and the Rurouni Kenshin event probably stopped short of one. It stopped short of being just right. It probably needed one more character to be just right, but then to follow that up with events that were much smaller than normal, and you know, we got a bunch of limiteds in October that people weren't necessarily happy about, and I mean, you know, it was a tricky month for the Jumputi devs because they did get a lot of backlash from a lot of fans on Twitter. I know that's not representative of the whole community, but when people are being that vocal and the devs have gone so far as to apologise, that tells you something. That tells you that they are listening and they might make some changes to how they do things. Before we get into talking about the ensemble though and what they might try and do there, I want to start with the feature festival. That should be beginning sometime around the start of December. And I'm just going to throw on the screen the stage names that we currently have. Now, obviously, a lot of these I'm going to be snagging up and talking about in the ensemble part of the video. But even though we've had a lot of these stages come back recently, I'm not going to talk about stages that have come back for the feature festival. For the feature festival, I have my eye on 2 stages that were added recently, and I think they are going to play a big part in the feature festival. So, 3 stages here on the screen right now. One of them is an older stage, but I'm not actually going to include it. But the feature festival, I think, is going to be Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, only one of these stages is actually labelled Yu-Gi-Oh! But we're not including that one. And the reason we're not including that one is because the newer stages suggest they're going for something particular with their feature festival, and Sky Doll Arena doesn't really fit that. There is another reason, and that is because this stage was originally made for the Seto Kaiba Unity Battle, which, if you play the game, you'll know never happened, because Seto Kaiba, along with Orochimaru and Shinseijiro, actually didn't get made into a Unity battle. It got made into a battle rush instead, and so they didn't need that stage background. Okay, fair enough. So they've just got some stages that are just not being used. But the Ice Shield 21 one at least was used to set the scene for some of the stuff in Annie when Kurita got added to the game, and they made an awakening stage or an evolution stage for him and Hiruma. And the Suemori Castle one, which again was an old stage added but didn't get used, it got used as a background. Seto Kaiba stage can make a comeback at some point, but I don't think it will be during this event. So for those of you who are maybe a bit newer to the channel, or you know, whatever, you might not know I'm a bit of a weeb, okay? In high school, we had our dedicated reading time, and quite often I would read manga. Now I have a whole box of different volumes up in my attic, and included in that is of course Yu-Gi-Oh! Now on the screen I've got a picture of some of the volumes I have laid out for you. They're not in the best condition, but that's because I read them. You know, I used to read manga all the time. That also meant that I had to bring it into school, which meant it was in my bag with all the other shit I used to bring in, and it got kind of roughed up. But these books hold some special memories for me and some fantastic stories. Now, you'll be able to see in this picture that the English release of the manga, it separates the first 7 volumes from the rest of the story. The following volumes, where you can see it's labelled as Duelist, that carries on for ages and tells, well, the story of Yugi as a duelist. But the first 7 volumes have practically no card duels at all. As the title of the series suggests, these 7 volumes are about the core premise of the series. A pitiful, small, teenage boy who gets bullied and messed with a lot in his life, and he finds comfort in life by playing games by himself. Until one day, one of those puzzles that his dear old grandpa brought him just so happened to be possessed by an ancient Egyptian spirit. And so, when he finishes that puzzle and he has crafted an ancient Egyptian artifact, he becomes possessed by this spirit who is known as the King of Games. These 7 volumes are far different to the tale I was used to when I was watching the 4Kids anime as a child. For a start, the story's completely different. These 7 volumes do somewhat contain some stories that appeared in the anime, but anything from here that does appear in the anime is cut down to its very bare bones, altered heavily, and then just shoved into the anime as a one-off episode, a flashback, or some kind of Frankenstein monster of the two. It's also important to point out that this is a way darker, way more mature collection of adventures with Yugi and the gang. I highly recommend reading these if you haven't already for yourself. These really make me appreciate the story of Yugi a lot more, because it's just different. It's not all about card games, you know. I can make an argument here, like, you know, that some people might disagree with, that you know, a lot of the stuff in Yu-Gi-Oh! Was pushed in a certain direction because, yo, we like money, and you know, the card game was profitable. But these original stories it's kind of before all that. It's its own thing. Now, these stories are not segregated in Japan. It's all just the tales of Yugi, but they kind of had to separate them in the West because people didn't know that these stories really existed back then. So all they knew Yu-Gi-Oh! was the card game. So they needed to separate these 7 volumes. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has changed a lot since the days of these volumes. one is almost entirely unrecognizable from the other nowadays. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The card game is absolutely massive globally, and the change in direction for the series was necessary for that to happen. For the franchise to grow the way it has over the years, a change in focus on the story was absolutely key to that. But these early years really are something special. The purest, most concentrated form of Kazuki Takahashi's storytelling. And I personally think it's a real treat for any Yu-Gi-Oh fan who hasn't read it. To get back on track though, we have two stages here that are clearly references to two massive moments in the original series. We have Def T5 Dome type arena and Monster World Battlefield. These two stages, interestingly, you're probably somewhat familiar with, but maybe not exactly in the way that you remember them. Let me explain. Def T5 Dome type arena is a stage from the conclusion of one of the longer arcs in this part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Namely, the conclusion of Yugi versus Seto Kaiba. There are only two instances of dual monsters showing up in the original manga, and one of those is a 2-chapter story in Volume 2, and the other is this, a 13-chapter arc that spans Volumes 4 and 5. Both of these stories revolve around Seto Kaiba, and this was actually a great story within the original volumes. You see, most of the opponents Yugi had in the various stories, they fought Yugi, they lost, and then that was pretty much it for them. They get mind crushed, or they get sent to the Shadow Realm, or whatever, and we don't really hear about them again, at all. Seto Kaiba was a bit different. Yugi dealt with him back in Volume 2 after he stole Yugi's grandpa's Blue Eyes card. Yugi gets the card back, Kaiba is dealt with much like every other villain, and then job done. Right? Obviously not. Kaiba comes busting back onto the scene in Volume 4. This time he's got all his fuck you money with him, and he's using it to his advantage. He builds a whole theme park and invites Yugi and the gang to come and enjoy. While they're there, Seto captures Yugi's grandfather and forces him to duel and beats him fair and square. He then takes that Blue Eyes card that he stole before and he destroys it. You see, Seto is using new technology to create holograms that reenact the monster illusions that Yugi used on him with the Millennium Puzzle back in their last battle. He swears that the illusions will drive Yugi's grandpa to insanity, and he says he won't stop unless Yugi agrees to face him and face the challenge of Def T. This, in parts at least, might sound familiar to watchers of the anime. This is the real build-up to the iconic battle between Yugi and Kaiba that can be seen in the very first episode of the 4Kids anime. And that's what Def T5 Dome type arena is. It's the stage of the battle between Kaiba and Yugi, and it's at the end of the Def T theme park of Def. Now, as for Monster World Battlefield, this refers to a 9-chapter story that spans the end of Volume 6 and the entirety of Volume 7, aka the final story before Yugi moved on to Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist. This is the origin story of Ryo Bakura. Again, a story you are probably very familiar with. Essentially, Bakura uses his Millennium item the same way Yugi has been the whole series. But this time, it's not being used by our protagonist, but against him. Bakura is a new transfer to the school, and he enjoys this game called Monster World. It's a role-playing board game that has a lot of similarities to D&D. The difference between the soul in Yugi's Millennium item and Bakura's is completely out of control. It usurps control over Bakura, forcing people to play games with him, leading to them being put into comas, which I guess is similar to what Yugi was doing, but Yugi was only doing it when people was a dick, I guess. So I guess Bakura's the bad guy and Yugi's the good guy, even though, you know, the spirits in their items are very similar. Bakura moves schools to get away from what happened, and he tries his hardest to stop Yugi and co from getting involved. But when they come to visit him outside of school, the Millennium Ring takes over and invites Yugi and the gang to come and play Monster World with him. Much like the duel with Bakura you're probably familiar with from the show, the ring sends the gang's souls into the characters' figurines of the game they were playing. And now, with Yami Yugi the only person left in charge of Yugi's body, he has to play the game against Bakura in order to save his friends. So the name Monster World Battlefield, I mean, it speaks for itself really. Now, after that long tangent, let me talk about what we could expect from the series as a feature festival. Here are my predictions. By the way, even though this manga uses the original Japanese names of the characters, just to make things easier, I'm going to be using the 4 kids' names for this video. Now, with what you've got here, you could easily take Joey out of the gacha and just make him an evolution event for his old 4-star unit. Or, alternatively, take Ryo Bakura out of the gacha and only have one version of Bakura in the event, Yami Bakura, or Ryo Bakura. Or have one as a costume of the other, maybe in a catastrophe class event type thing. I would kind of love to see Def T as an event similar to the Gintama stage where you could farm Nizo and Takasugi. Make Seto and Mokuba the equivalent farmables for this event, but have other stages where you can challenge non-farmable characters like Kaiba's Mooks and the Chainsaw Guy leading up to those stages. I feel like there's really a lot you can do with Def T and Monster World. Beyond that though, a lot of the characters in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Volumes, they're not necessarily characters you'd bother to make farmable. I've included Shardy in here because he's an important character to the series, but he only briefly appears in the manga in 2-3 chapters together, something like that. But I felt like I needed one more Transcendent Class type event thing here, and he sort of was the character that fit. The most iconic character left. Beyond what I've written here, we could maybe see Hirotani as like a beginner or transcendent class event. Hopefully not, but we could see Tristan's nephew Joji make some kind of appearance as a sort of, you know, gag character. It wouldn't be the first one we've had. Some kind of free farmable anyway. And for Taya and Yugi's grandpa, I expect that Tai's event will be similar to Koichi's event, and for Solomon Muto, maybe something similar to Hajime Saito's event. I will say that I think I always slightly overshoot these events on these predictions, so cut maybe one unit out of this prediction and it'll be pretty close. I'm also hoping we get a costume for Taya too, either the swimsuit costume or the uniform from the diner she works at, because those would both make sense, especially if you make her a free unit, because those are 2 pretty important moments in the story for her. I also think there's a possibility that the amusement park story will be the equivalent of the daily event or the points event for the feature festival, because there weren't really any suitable enemies in that story, but it's still an important story. So you wouldn't necessarily put a farmable character on it. And, you know, we already have an amusement park stage in the files anyway from Golden Week, so It just makes sense. You can make it like a points event, and then you can use the points to purchase maybe copies of Taya or a costume for Taya. And I don't know, these are just rough ideas, but I think that's going to be pretty close. I'm hoping that's going to be pretty close. And I'm pretty happy to see a Yu-Gi-Oh event potentially coming on here that is going to be featured around this set of stories, because these stories are awesome. Okay, so this video is already pretty long, but we still need to talk about the potential 2 events to fill the space until the Yu-Gi-Oh! Feature Festival begins. Namely, from the 12th of this month until sometime near the end of this month, start of December. With the stages you can see on the screen, I think I have an idea of what I would go with. To begin with, I'll say this. I think it's probably going to be something similar, or at least somewhat similar, to what we got finishing off October, in terms of having a proper ensemble event and then having a smaller themed event. But I do think, due to the criticisms that they got, they will structure it differently. And obviously, once again, I remind you guys that we have very little to go off here, so for these events at least, it's a blind guess. If I get even one character or the basic theme of the event right, I would be very happy. So for the first event, that would probably run for about 10 days or so, from the 12th to around the 22nd, 23rd. This event would be the equivalent of the Miss Jumputi event from October. I think this event, based on the name of one of the most recently added stages, would be an event called something like Jumputi TV. An event based around a TV production. So, just gonna throw my rough predictions on the screen right now. Now, like I said, this is all a complete guess, very loosely speculated based upon small bits of information that we do have, but I really did have fun trying to figure out how this could all work. The idea is that Jumputi open up a TV station, and they use characters from the game as actors on various shows. This way, it's sort of like 5 or 6 different themes squeezed into one. But I don't think you'd be taking away from any other events that would want to have similar themes to those in the shows. Now, the only one of these that doesn't use existing stage information as a base is the Death Island one. And look, I know it's supposed to be a movie in the series, but I couldn't not include Act Age in an event about TV. She's the only character I can think of off the top of my head, Kei Yanagi that is a protagonist and is an actor from Shonen Jump. So even though Death Island is a movie, with this event being themed around TV, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to include her. Besides, with her stage, you could pretty much just use any forest stage. Like, I'm sure they added about 3 forest stages for the Rurouni Kenshin event, but only used one, the one with a shrine in it. So, one of those could probably work just fine. I also think, like, they could definitely try something different than what I have said with the Otakojuku stuff. Like, maybe one of these events doesn't make it in, and then the matching gacha unit gets removed, so they just put a V2 Momotaro in a white uniform in the gacha. I would say that's probably more likely than anything I've said here. It's also possible we could see V2 Momotaro as a limited, but as much as that is something I would like to see, I don't really see that happening. And if they are doing a Legend Summon to go with all this, I would like to see the third years from Otokojuku as a Legend Summon. I haven't read all of Otokojuku, but I read this arc at least, just so I could get an idea of, you know, what I can expect from this story. It's pretty good. And, well, you can see my predictions on the screen. I think chances are, if they're having it their way, if they're doing it what they would say is the right way, because they still need to make profit, but they still want to show appreciation to the smaller series, probably a bigger series than Otokojuku will actually get the limited, and we'll just be happy to get 2 Otokojuku units in the first place. Considering the stage that has been added, it's specifically from an arc where Genji, Jay, Ryuji, and Momotaro all work together as a team of 4. It seems only fair to upgrade the 2 4-stars with some kind of Evolver event into 6 stars. I think that's reasonable. For other stuff I considered for this event, I mean, a cooking show. We have Shokugeki no Soma, there's no reason you couldn't have a cooking show as part of this. But I had a hard time settling on what characters should be featured, because there's still so many we don't have, and I don't know which stages you necessarily pick and choose for this event. And as for Ice Shield 21 taking the slot as the sports show, really a number of series could have fit there, and now that I'm thinking about it, Captain Tsubasa probably makes more sense, because we did just get Kongo Agon, so maybe they wouldn't do an Ice Shield 21 thing again so soon, and they'd give Captain Tsubasa a bit of love, because it's been a little while since we had some Captain Tsubasa stuff. But look, if I'm even close to this one, not only would it be a big shocker, but I would be thoroughly delighted. To follow this event, I would have a themed event, just like we had with the Ninja event in October. This time, however, it would be superhero themed. Now, I'm just going to warn you right now, there's going to be some My Hero Academia spoilers ahead. Nothing major, just that an encounter between 2 characters does happen. So, if this is the point where you sign off in the video, I'll see you later. But if everybody has read My Hero Academia, let's carry on. As you can see, I made this event a little bit bigger than the Ninja one. Just by adding 1 stage in, which is a stage for the limited being added to actually counter, it adds a bit more weight to the event. Now, I'm not sure if they would actually cover this My Hero Academia arc, because it was so recent, and it's not really a fight between Endeavor and Dabi. But that hasn't stopped them before, and I think it fits the theme, so, like, fuck it, you know? Now, these 2 events are separate entities. You've got 1 small event and 1 medium-sized event. But together, you've got a 2 to 3 week, pretty sizable event. And if we say that the first event is all about a TV show, and then the second event, the TV show gets interrupted. A supervillain takes over the broadcast. This sort of thing happens in TV shows and movies all the time. The supervillains take over the broadcast, and then they hijack the event. The event becomes all about heroes defeating villains. I will say this. I think the Ninja event, I think the idea was very good. I really do. But the execution was poor. Like, having new Hana no Keiji units added to the game is cool. But it was added at a weird time with very few obtainables, with a very questionable choice of limited character who was made insanely powerful. And I think, you know, having these themed events is an opportunity to give some love to some series that maybe haven't gotten much love, and to, you know, pull people into the game in a different way. You still have the limited from the popular series, so you're still getting your money. People are still going to be pulling for that because A, he's powerful as shit, and B, he's from a popular series. But look, I think with the hero one, I've done things a little bit differently, and I think this is probably the better way to do it. The limited character is not countering some bullshit stage that we don't know about yet, because he's super OP and he's going to be good for PvP. He counters a stage that's right there before you. And it's a character you would want. You know, I think a lot of people would want Endeavor, but I think a lot more would be so happy to have a free Dabby available in the game. Well, look, just let me know what you think. I'm confident Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to be next, and I've at least got a few things right, I think. But with the other event, well, we'll see, but I am less than confident. We'll check back on these predictions around the same time next month to see how wrong I was and to make some predictions for Christmas and New Year. Let me know your thoughts on not just my predictions, but what do you think's coming? And hopefully you guys have some interesting ideas, because I don't think mine are happening. But that's all for today. I'll see you guys next time.